Welcome to Watches with Dennis. Well, I have been a watch collector for years now. I know a lot of people favor just having one watch that isn't a smartwatch. Sometimes it's an individual just now getting into watches. Sometimes it's a collector that's looking to get out of collecting itself. Regardless of the reason, there are plenty of watches out there that can serve really well in a one watch capacity. I wore a single watch for about 15 years, so I know it can happen. However, given the different desires that one may have, the best watch to go one and done with varies by personality. In this video, I will go over 5 categories that I think are common for potential buyers to want and have a single watch in. And so I will provide a few options from 1 to 3, depending on the category, for your consideration. Note that all of the watch models that I will be using here are examples that I have actually owned myself. So I am driving this from my own firsthand experiences. But obviously there is variance within model lines. So the main purpose here is to give you some ideas and not have you get hung up on specifically what I happen to like. So let us begin. The first category is functionality above all. For some people, functionality is what they most desire in a watch. Often such individuals want features and accuracy, and being affordable can often be a separate variable, but there are really a lot of affordable options that do exist in this space thanks to quartz. My recommendation would be in this category the Casio G-Shock, specifically my experiences with the GWM 5610. Again, there are plenty of other G-Shocks that can meet this need, but I am specifically advocating for square models with the ability to sync for atomic clock updates. The reason is you get the quartz accuracy, but with the added benefit of the sync updates, the time is pretty much mimicking, actually exceeding what you would get out of a high accuracy quartz, but at a much lower price point. You get a classic design that tends to go well with almost everything other than really formal attire. You get such features as a stopwatch and an alarm. You have illumination so you can read the watch at night. This model that I've cited has solar charging, so it avoids battery swaps. In short, G-Shock is an excellent one-and-done watch model line, especially if you want to go with something that is solar and a radio sync or a Bluetooth sync model. And in the regards to the radio sync versions, they are quite affordable. The second category would be a Rolex. Some people just want a Rolex full stop, be it as a sign of success, celebrating the birth of a child, or some other key milestone. There are a lot of reasons, and Rolex is broadly in the psyche of the world as a watch for that purpose. My first luxury watch was, in fact, a Rolex. Now, if you know Rolex, you likely already have identified the models that you are interested in, and you're not really going to go wrong with any of them. But if the name itself is what you desire and you don't have a specific model in line, then I am going to go ahead and suggest Oyster Perpetual as the ideal option for a one and done. You're going to get the key aspects of a Rolex watch. You're going to get the Oyster case, so that shape, that iconic shape. You're going to get the 100 meters of water resistance. If it's a relatively modern watch, then you're going to get a well-made bracelet, and the movement is going to be solid with high performance for a mechanical movement. The Datejust itself is a more iconic watch, but that's part of the reason why I like the Oyster Perpetual. Also, in general, the Oyster Perpetual is a more affordable watch than a Datejust, and other than certain very popular dial color options, it tends to avoid the same inflation issues on the secondary market that we see from the professional line of Rolex watches. You get dial symmetry, thanks to the lack of the date, and it also allows you, through the Oyster Perpetual, to avoid 2 of the most controversial aspects on a lot of Rolex watches. The most controversial being the Cyclops to expand the date to make it easier to read, but a lot of people don't like that on top of the crystal. And the other aspect is the Mercedes handset. Less controversial, but some people do find the Mercedes look to be polarizing, and you can avoid that with Oyster Perpetual. Oyster Perpetuals come in all sorts of sizes too, so it's practically impossible not to find one that's going to fit you really well. My third category is entry-level luxury. I hate the expression of entry-level when it comes to talking luxury, but it is a common expression that a lot of people understand inherently. To define it a bit more, though, what I'm talking about is watches that can generally be had between $1,000 and $2,000 US. In this category, I have one suggestion for you, and it's actually one of my most favorite one-and-done options, and that is the Tudor 1926. Like the aforementioned Oyster Perpetual, you can get a variety of diameter options for the 1926, so finding the right size is quite easy. This watch functions a lot like a Rolex Datejust, but it has its own unique dial options. Namely, they all seem to feature, at least at this time, waffle textures, but they do come in an assortment of colorways. There is a date, but there's no Cyclops over it, and the watch itself in part because of that, but in part because of the case design and the movement, is quite thin. In fact, even though this watch is powered by an automatic movement, they are all under 10 millimeters thick, which is rarer than you might assume for mechanicals in this price range. The only real downside to this model line is they don't use the Tudor in-house movements, and it ends up being confined to 38 hours power reserve. But if this is your only watch, the power reserve is not nearly as impactful as it is for watch collectors rotating through a variety of watches. And Tudor does actually regulate these third-party movements, so they are more accurate than you might assume. Another plus to the 1926 model line is they don't use the Tudor Snowflake handset. That avoids one of the biggest areas of controversy that keeps a lot of people away from a variety of Tudor's other more popular model lines. This is one of my most favorite models to recommend to individuals. I know I have mentioned it numerous times in other videos that I have done, but I think it really is quite impressive if you are looking at something as a one and done option. At the time of this video, you can find these all day on the gray market for under $2,000 US. My fourth category of consideration for a one and done I'm calling something odd. Okay, me making odd watch suggestions is difficult because I don't really go for avant-garde. I prefer much more conservative designs in general, so I do have a couple of suggestions for you, but they might not be the best suggestions, but you're stuck with things that I've happened to own in my history of watch collecting. If you want just a single watch and you want it to be something of a novelty and fun, then you really should explore the lineup of Mr. Jones watches. I have owned a couple, but I'm going to go ahead and suggest a model that I have and continue to possess. So I'm going to specifically name the Ricochet. It is in the main catalog, so you can readily get it. The dial color is different now than it was when I bought it, but the basic look is the same. And the reason why I like it so much is it looks cool. It's mechanical, so you still get the mechanical aspect if you're into that. It actually has a jump hour, which is a fun feature to look at. And you can even see it jump when you actually set the time. So you don't have to literally just sit there and watch for it. But if you do, it is a rewarding experience. And pinball is another hobby of mine. And this watch is themed around pinball, so it just made sense for me to have. I've actually received more compliments on Ricochet than any other watch in my collection to date. If you're wanting something more traditional, but still what I'll call odd, I would suggest taking a look at some of the Type B Fliegers. Again, speaking from my own ownership experience, I would suggest the Stova Flieger Classic 40 Baumaster B. Probably mispronounced that. It can be had in other sizes other than the 40 millimeters, which is what the 40 signifies in the name of the watch. Type B Fliegers are subtle watches, so you really can wear them in a lot of situations. But with the hour markers being inset towards the center of the dial, it comes across as a very different look than what one typically finds on a wristwatch today. The lume also tends to be really solid on these Fliegers, and Stova definitely sticks the landing when it comes to lume. I think Fliegers make good strap monster watches, and I'm assuming just because you're after a one-and-done watch, you're still actually going to be cool with owning multiple straps. These watches tend to come on casual-looking straps, reminiscent of the original purpose of the Fliegers, but if you throw it on a nice calf leather strap, you can really wear these watches with much more formal attire. Speaking about the Stova I owned specifically, the modernized case design is really quite comfortable, and I think the watch wears great. You can often configure Fliegers as well, so if you want it automatic or manual, date or no date, you often have options to get something that truly meets your needs. The fifth and final category I'm going to cover is a dive style watch. I've got 3 possible suggestions depending on your budget, as I tend to find that most people who want a watch want a dive watch, or at least a watch with a timing bezel and some water resistance. All of my suggestions are mechanical. At the most affordable end of the spectrum, I would suggest Orient. I'm going to name the Orient Kano specifically, which is a great choice if you happen to like larger watches. Otherwise, I would say if you want something similar but smaller, take a look at the Orient Komatsu line. But with a diameter of 44 millimeters and a lug-to-lug distance of 50 millimeters, most wrists can pull the Kano off. You also will get 200 meters of water resistance, and the model that I had was only 13 millimeters thick, so in that regard, it was quite wearable. The bezel has a unique ratchet-like action that differs from other dive watches I've handled, but feels a lot better than anything that's just friction fit. And you do get an in-house movement in the F6922. The biggest downsides of the Kano are the bracelet and that the crystal is mineral glass. But this isn't atypical for the price point, and if it really bothers you in regards to the crystal side, you can look at the Komatsu line, which does have sapphire options. The bracelets at this price bracket always tend to disappoint in my experience. So I would really suggest if you do get one to go ahead and move it to a silicone strap, which is a personal favorite of mine for dive watches. And in regards to the Orient Kano, these can be found for around $200 US. My second dive watch suggestion for a one and done would be a Seiko Pro Specs. I specifically had the SRPH57, which is a king turtle format. So we're going to move up a little bit in price versus the Orient. You're going to have a lug-to-lug of only 47.5 millimeters, even though it's a 45 millimeter watch. And the reason why it's smaller in lug-to-lug but larger in diameter is the watch actually has a turtle shape, and it makes it quite wearable despite that larger diameter size. As a king turtle format, you do get a sapphire crystal. You're going to get the 200 meters of water resistance. And this model had one of the quietest, in fact, as a dive watch, the quietest bezel I have ever worked with. And it is also driven by an in-house movement, in this case, the robust 4R36. Drilled lugs on this model also were a nice touch, so strap changes were a breeze. Like the Orient that I discussed before, the bracelet is not great, but this specific model comes with a strap as well, which feels really good. And as I noted, I'm a really big fan of third-party silicone strap options for dive watches for warmer months, and so the Seiko really works in a variety of configurations. This watch that I'm specifically citing retails for $750. Non-King Turtles will retail in for less, but this model at the time of this video can easily be found new for under $600, and you can actually find them used for under $500. So we don't have to go a whole lot up higher in the price point. The last dive watch that I'm going to suggest is going to be a significant price jump, but you're also going to get a pretty big jump in quality, and it's going to be the Omega Seamaster 300M line, a very famous dive watch line. There are a lot of options here. I happen to own a relatively modern gray dial version, which weighed in at roughly 42 millimeters in diameter and a 49.5 millimeter lug-to-lug. It's not huge, but the watch does wear big. It actually is the thickest of these three watches that I've talked about at just under 14 millimeters. And if you really like the feel of heft, if you associate that heft with luxury, then I'm going to say that the 300M is one of the most substantial feeling watches, probably the most substantial that I have ever owned. The bracelets for the 300M don't taper. And so they do tend to have a very significant presence on the wrist, but far more comfortable than the bracelets on the aforementioned Seiko and Orient models. You get 300 meters of water resistance out of the 300M, as the name might suggest. The bezel's scalloped shape is harder to grip than the other watches I've mentioned, but the clicking action on rotation is deeply satisfying, and you can feel how well engineered the bezel is. With this watch, you also get an in-house movement, the caliber 8800, which is METIS certified, so it's going to be a guaranteed accuracy far higher than the aforementioned Seiko and Orient models. The design of the 300M is iconic, and this can comfortably function as a one and done with a variety of straps. If James Bond in the 1990s could wear the Orient Seamaster 300M in any formal or informal situation, you can too. This watch currently retails on Omega's site at $5,900 US, but if you are willing to consider used versions, you can find a lot of examples in the $4,000 to $5,000 price range. Other colors may see more significant differences in price also, so if you don't like gray, there are plenty of other choices out there with the same or similar specs. So there you go. Those are my suggestions for a one and done watch based on my firsthand experience and by categories that I think many of you would consider. You'll notice I avoided saying anything or using a category about dress watches outright, despite dress watches being my favorite category of watch. And the reason I did that is I don't think I've ever encountered anyone who said to me that they wanted a one and done watch, but they wanted to accept something as delicate as a dress watch. Was it a mistake for me to leave that category out? I'd like to see your suggestions in the comments below about what you would recommend as a one and done watch. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll talk to you all on the next one.